Hello and welcome to episode 39 of the GreenWave podcast by Synergy International. I'm SYNI, your host, and today's topic is New York Climate Week, one of the big, high-profile gatherings on the sustainable calendar. As the conference kicks off in full, we want to answer two important questions many of you may share. Is this spectacle or substance? And are we meeting to admire the problem or to move capital, policy, and technology at the speed required? Let us work through our answers in 5 pieces of thinking. History and origins. Who is on the mic this week? What impact to expect in real terms? What the record says about outcomes from prior years? And what future trends and complementary events, like Harvard Climate Action Week, can add to the signal? Like cooler, shorter days, New York Climate Week arrives each September with a familiar rhythm. Heads of state pass motorcades and barricades. Investors and scientists compare notes over coffee that somehow tastes like determination. Activists march with banners that never wrinkle. New Yorkers do what New Yorkers do best. They keep moving and make space for the world to talk about its future. The week now stretches across the city and across sectors. The schedule this year started yesterday and runs through September 28th. 1,000 stages and side rooms and studios convene an argument disguised as a festival. The story began in 2009. The climate group seeded a simple idea in New York alongside the United Nations General Assembly. Put mayors next to ministers and meteorologists, put the chief financial officer next to the chief sustainability officer, and give them a timeline shorter than a negotiation round. The week has since become the largest recurring climate conference convening outside the United Nations process. The reason is not mystique. It is proximity and repetition. Global leaders, journalists, and civil society all arrive anyway. Add a dense program of meetings and the city becomes a climate amplifier. You can see the design goal in the early origin story. Less protocol, more iteration, more room for the private sector and cities, less concern for communiques that take a year to draft. That design choice shaped the culture of the week. Deals are not sealed on stage, they are tested in the corridors. Commitments are not celebrated as grand strategy. They are interrogated for feasibility. It is a marketplace of climate action, and New York does not do understatement. Who are the voices to track this week? The list is long and sprawling, which is another way of saying that curation matters. One stream to watch is the Axios House programming during the week. It features voices that sit at the intersection of federal energy policy, grid reliability, and the reality of rising demand. Jared Ajan, a senior energy strategist in Washington. Neil Chatterjee, former chair of the Federal Energy Regulator. Matteo Jaramillo, who helped stand up large-scale storage and is now pushing the envelope on multi-day storage. That group is discussing the race to deliver the energy system of tomorrow and the practicalities of permitting and siting that shape, whether projects move from whiteboard to ribbon cutting. Another Axios session foregrounds data centers and electricity demand. Listen for Katharina Bumelberg of Heidelberg Materials and Hilary Hunter of IBM on the way. Computing loads and cement transformation collide with the laws of physics and finance. Political voices surface as well. Senator Jan Shaheen brings a foreign policy lens that links supply chains and climate diplomacy. And on another day, nuclear expansion and the role of advanced designs take the spotlight with Chris Levesque of TerraPower and Clay Sell of X Energy in conversation about building new, clean firm capacity at scale. There is a reason these names matter. They translate the headlines about energy abundance into the engineering and procurement decisions that either will or will not bend the emissions curve and keep the lights on in an AI-hungry economy. Another stream is the series of corporate and civil events that anchor the middle of the week. Sustainability Live convenes a council of the people paid to do the work inside large firms. Jim Andrew of PepsiCo, Pilar Cruz of Cargill, Christina Schim of Smurfit Westrock, Jen Huffstetler of HP, Karin Svensson of Volvo Group. These sessions are worth attention because they do not ask whether to decarbonise. They ask how to sequence Scope 3 programs, how to disclose with integrity amid divergent standards, and how to spend real money without eroding competitiveness. The virtue of this forum is that it drags strategy into operations. A chief sustainability officer can talk in the morning about supplier engagement, and in the afternoon will face a procurement lead who needs price and lead time along with a carbon number. Universities across the city bring depth and constructive friction. Columbia's climate law and policy events draw people who live and breathe statutes and case law. Romany Webb, Michael Gerard, and Michael Berger dig into carbon removal policy, the uses of administrative law in environmental protection, and the uneasy marriage between rapidly advancing digital tools and environmental safeguards. The sessions bridge science, policy, and litigation in a way many practitioners find essential. And the food systems and circularity crowd shows up in force. Food Tanks Gathering brings Massimo Bottura for the culture of waste reduction and Ligia Noronha of the United Nations on the policy architecture behind food system transformation. Somani Sengupta of the New York Times frames the narrative. A chef and a senior diplomat and a reporter in the same room is how you get policy language that everyday people can live with. The civic side remains unmistakable. Ceres curates a main stage at the Nest Climate Campus with Senator Sheldon Whitehouse and a set of former bipartisan House members. They debate the pragmatic path for climate-aligned policy inside a fractious legislature, and they bring private capital voices like Mindy Lubber into the same frame. The University of Chicago surfaces adaptation and Global South leadership with the Minister of Climate for Vanuatu and the head of the Global Centre on Adaptation. The programme composition matters. It opens a lane for adaptation finance and for a clearer role for insurance and sovereign risk pools that too often sit off stage. That covers this week's notable speakers. What matters more is the impact side, what moves from talk to consequence. Start with scale. The week now hosts over 1,000 events and activations. Scale by itself is not substance. It can be noise. Yet scale creates optionality and collision space. Collision space lets small coalitions form across sectors. Those cross-sector coalitions have a habit of producing the only kind of climate action that endures, the kind that can survive a board meeting, a legislative session, a court challenge, and a supply chain shock. Second, the power of private finance and corporate strategy is stronger this year because of the policy context. When national signals falter, subnational governments and firms fill in the gaps. That is not ideal for the theory of collective action, yet it is often how the world actually moves. Watch for corporate procurement deals that grow new zero-carbon electricity in places that need it most. Watch for offtake agreements for clean fuels and low-carbon materials. Watch for insurers and asset owners stress-testing portfolios against physical climate risk with updated hazard datasets. The language changes when money changes hands. Third, context around artificial intelligence and electricity demand. What a different year this is. Data center demand is now a mainstream climate variable. Semiconductor companies, cloud providers, construction firms, and electric utilities are arguing over the same transformer. In this week's sessions, you will hear two numbers repeated: the growth in computing demand and the time required to add transmission. Mismatched timelines force one of two outcomes. Either efficiency and load management find new muscle, or new clean firm capacity is built faster than we have done in decades. That is why nuclear and long-duration storage and grid-enhancing technologies receive so much stage time. Fourth, climate justice and inclusion are less add-ons and more design constraints. Panels on energy insecurity, landlord-tenant dynamics, and neighborhood-level resilience are not side rooms anymore. Harvard's Diana Hernandez has an entire session on the lived experience of energy insecurity and housing quality. That kind of expertise is becoming central to how utilities design programs and how regulators judge whether public dollars are landing where they should. Corporate teams are taking the hint and moving beyond the old model, where a separate philanthropy office carried the entire burden of equity. Fifth, food systems and land use continue their move from rhetoric to investment. Expect discussion of credible carbon removal paired with governance standards. Expect more critical attention to corporate claims in agriculture and forestry. There is steady pressure from civil society to move from offsets to measured outcomes linked to soil health, biodiversity, and rural livelihoods. You can feel the learning curve in these rooms. A chef talks about dignity in work, and a supply chain scientist talks about gram-level measurement. Yet, given the current climate of swirling distrust, will this just descend into a media circus? The criticism is not new. There are good reasons to be wary. Corporate presence can turn into performance art. Sponsors sometimes arrive with PowerPoints that say very little. And every year, the city opens with a march reminding everyone that the clock keeps time with fires and floods, not with press releases. We should take those concerns seriously for two reasons. First, because movements have a track record of exposing empty claims and forcing course correction. Second, because accountability strengthens legitimate action. New York protesters this weekend have targeted financial institutions and concentrated wealth. They are not whispering. The takeaway for our community is straightforward. If we announce something, it needs a timeline and a budget, and a way for others to see progress. When we ask whether the week delivers, we should start with a simple accounting of past outcomes. In 2021, the state of New York used this moment to announce two large transmission projects that move clean power to the city from upstate and Canada. Clean Path New York and Champlain Hudson were not slogans. They were program-level infrastructure choices with job numbers, dollars, and a regulatory path. In 2023, Columbia joined the coalition to phase out coal power. That move did not erase the role of coal in its economy overnight, yet it signaled intention and aligned with a broader regional pattern. In recent years, the week has delivered corporate transition plans that add detail to net zero pledges. It has produced clear commitments to buy low-carbon steel, cement, and aviation fuel. The Environmental Defense Fund and others have documented an uptick in corporate investment in clean energy procurement. We have also seen nature and biodiversity rise in the conversation, with stronger arguments for nature-based solutions and better guardrails for integrity. None of this is perfect. Some boasts wilt under scrutiny. Yet the record is not empty. Outcomes exist and they are measurable. So, what can we expect this year in particular? Expect corporate action around Scope 3 emissions to move one notch from aspiration toward execution. That means more supplier engagement with real carrots and sticks. It means product design changes that reduce embedded emissions. It means procurement contracts that favour low-carbon inputs even with modest price premia. Expect the grid to be front and centre. Energy developers and utilities will talk through interconnection backlogs and the very basic business of siting lines and substations. Expect adaptation finance to show up in more places than it used to. Sovereign risk, municipal bonds, and insurance reform sit on more agendas this year, not because it is fashionable, but because balance sheets demand it. Expect carbon removal to keep climbing the ladder. We will hear about new plants, new crediting rules, and new buyers who are not doing this for marketing reasons, but because they face residual emissions they cannot eliminate in the near term. And expect a hard conversation about talent. Every panellist who runs a programme will tell you they need more project managers, more electricians, more planners, and more scientists who can translate research into design constraints. Now, to the origin story again, because origin often shapes trajectory. Climate Week was not built as an intergovernmental process. That liberates it from deadlock and exposes it to excess optimism. It is a fair trade. The week can act like a pressure valve and a proving ground. The question is whether we, as a community, enforce our own standards. Do we reward credible transition plans and punish performative promises? Do we elevate voices from the places where impacts bite first? Do we use this convening to build unlikely coalitions that outlive the news cycle? That is the culture we should cultivate. Measurement helps. The moment a company ties its climate language to capital expenditures and to science-based targets with interim milestones is the moment the conversation matures. The moment a city presents a zoning and permitting update that shortens time to build distributed energy or heat pumps is the moment residents can feel the difference. The moment a national government aligns its subsidy regime with transparent outcomes is the moment investors can move faster. New York creates a landscape where those moments can stack. There is also a complement event emerging from Cambridge, Massachusetts, which has its own importance. Harvard Climate Action Week has moved to September and now runs in parallel with New York. It culminates in a 2-day symposium titled Pathways for Progress on Energy and Climate, with Massachusetts Governor Maura Healey delivering a keynote. The week pulls in faculty like Jim Stock and Peter Tufano and Joe Aldi for sessions on power markets, fiscal instruments, and the political economy of climate policy. It includes a public conversation with Diana Hernandez on energy justice and public health, which is a fine example of research that translates directly into program design. Harvard also hosted a program in New York during the week at 583 Park Avenue to engage directly with the Climate Week crowd. You can think of Boston and New York as a two-city seminar. Cambridge turns academic rigor into frameworks and pilot designs. New York turns those frameworks into coalitions and announcements. The back and forth serves the whole ecosystem. It ensures the week is fed by evidence and that the evidence is pulled through by practitioners in the field. The Harvard complement gives us 3 practical advantages. First, it shortens the feedback loop between research and practice. A policy concept can be presented on Monday in Cambridge and tested informally by a city official on Wednesday in Manhattan. Second, it reduces duplication. When universities curate the literature and surface the state of evidence, firms and philanthropies can stop reinventing the same slide decks and focus on solving the gaps. Third, it helps bridge the cultural gap between corporate speed and academic caution. The best sessions this month have both the cautious caveats and the urgency that comes from staring down an overloaded substation. Let us talk about one of the key points of our critique again, because it does not go away and should not. The charge of greenwashing hangs over any major climate gathering with corporate banners. It is useful. It forces clarity. This is a week where activists held signs demanding that financiers account for their role in expanding fossil fuel capacity. It is a week when journalists ask pointed questions about transition plans and lobbying records. The lesson for the serious among us is simple. Document annual progress. Disclose through standardized frameworks that enable comparisons. Align political contributions with public climate goals. Back words with legally enforceable contracts where possible. Publish the counterfactual. Tell the world what you are not doing and why. We should also acknowledge a quieter truth. Even the best-intentioned commitments fail without operational patience. Permitting reform takes time. Community engagement is not a box to tick. Supply chains shift slowly. The answer is not to retreat into fatalism. The answer is to explain the timeline and the constraints and then to attack both. If it takes 8 years to get a line built, do not shrug. Use non-wire alternatives, grid-enhancing technologies, better forecasting, and local generation to close the gap while policy grinds forward. If suppliers resist Scope 3 changes, leverage coalitions that create shared demand for low-carbon inputs and share playbooks openly. If a program did not work, say so. New York respects candor. There is another drumbeat this year. The energy transition is converging with a national political cycle that adds volatility. In the United States, federal tone has shifted. That does not end state-level ambition or city-level ingenuity. It does mean that private sector actors carry more of the practical burden for the next stretch. Investors who once relied on tailwinds must hold the line with a clearer thesis about risk-adjusted returns in clean infrastructure. Corporate buyers who once celebrated big numbers must translate those numbers into megawatt hours delivered. Universities that once stayed on the sidelines must help craft administrable rules and training programs to meet labour demand. Civil society that once took comfort in lofty language must expand its watchdog function and its partnership function in the same breath. If you listen closely this week, you will hear a more pragmatic tone. Even when the stage lights are bright, the subtext is project finance and logistics. That is welcome. It is also a chance for those of us in sustainable finance and policy to raise the quality of the conversation. When a firm announces a low-carbon cement deal, ask about clinker substitution rates and performance guarantees. When a city touts heat pump adoption, ask about contractor pipelines and consumer financing. When a data center developer promises clean energy, ask whether the contract is shaping new supply on the grid or simply reshuffling certificates. New York rewards the detailed question. Our role at Synergy International, at least for this year, is to keep a running ledger. We measure what matters and we meet rhetoric with data. We look for the through lines that link this week to the year ahead. The through lines look clear enough. A tougher grid conversation integrated with AI and data center growth. A more serious approach to climate justice embedded in program design. A food and land conversation that matures into measurable outcomes. And a research to practice pipeline that shortens because Cambridge and New York have decided to treat September as a shared campus. The episode could end here with a tidy moral. That would be a disservice to the moment. This is not a story with a clean ending. It is a yearly status check inside a long transition that tests patience and rewards persistence, which is why we will keep returning to the same question. Did we trade headlines for execution? The answer rests less with the stage and more with what the stage enables. The rest of the year is where climate action lives. The week is where people shake hands and figure out how to get through the next constraint together. Well, that's a wrap on our 39th GreenWave podcast episode. We appreciate you sharing your time. You already know how to find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeart, Podchaser, Boomplay, and Player FM, so feel free to follow and share with friends. We'd love if you would leave a review. It's important to help our pod grow. If you have missed any of our LinkedIn posts or the GreenWave Gazette, you can always catch us on LinkedIn, X, Facebook, Instagram, or visit synergy-international.net. We'll keep reflecting on the trends shaping sustainable finance and global policy. Until next time, keep riding the green wave of sustainability.